Welcome, everybody, to our Live from the Library presentation. My name is Marianne Haruska, and I'm a member of the Foundation Board. Tonight, we had a wonderful opportunity to thank many of our donors, and we hope that you enjoyed meeting each other, and we'll enjoy this program as well. The Foundation provides funds for both of the libraries in Walnut Creek, the Ignacio Valley Library, as well as this brand new downtown library. And our funds help to add to the collections, and they add programming opportunities and materials for the libraries. Without this, they would still be excellent libraries, but with our help, they become fantastic libraries. So we thank you all for your assistance, and we'd also like to recognize that we have several sponsors: the Thomas J. Long Foundation and Beverly Borton. Beverly and her late husband Dave were long time champions of the library. Minuteman Press and the Contra Costa Times. I have a couple of housekeeping things. Are your cell phones turned off? We get asked this at every program we go to, I know. And there will be a time for questions at the end of the program. If you didn't pick up an index card at the desk when you came in, as the gals are picking up cards, they'll have others to give you if you think of a question midway. We will be filming this evening. Walnut Creek Television does the filming for us, and it'll be available on the public channel, which depends on which cable company you have, I guess, within the next few weeks. But this program and other programs that have been filmed are available through our website, wclibrary.org. And we have all the films, and you can watch them there on your laptop or your computer. We've put an evaluation sheet on every seat, and we hope you'll fill it out. We've asked you how you hear about us and if you have program suggestions and that sort of thing. All of that can be done without letting us know who you are. But we do have a place on the back, if you're willing to tell us, where you can put your email address, and this will assure that you get our e-news that comes out, which tells you about upcoming programs and various things that are happening at the library. This program, the Live from the Library, is produced and funded completely by the Library Foundation. And programs like this, well, they started our committee meetings. This one started with a little inset map that was part of a newspaper article on water in California. And where we think of the Bay or we think of the Delta, I mean, we think those are pretty big areas we're talking about. This map showed the Sierra to the ocean. And suddenly you think, my gosh, you know, this is a huge situation. And so we started from there, and we located Marc at the Bay Institute, and he does this sort of thing. He gives this kind of program. So he was prepared to talk about this big picture of where the water comes from, where it goes, and so on. My instructions to him were that we really didn't want to get into the politics tonight, although they're almost inseparable. But the thinking is that maybe if we can understand the water, where it comes from, how much there is, what man and nature both have done to change it over time, then we can make better decisions on the political aspect of it. Marc is a restoration specialist. He's worked for the Bay Institute for, what, 13 or 14 years. And he's been a United States representative on international wetlands groups. He's been a California Senate appointee to the Cal-Fed Bay Delta Authority. But most interesting was when I asked him for some personal details, and he says, well, I grew up in Walnut Creek. So he grew up in San Miguel, out Ignacio. He graduated from Ignacio Valley High School, and he played Little League in the field that used to be out here outside the library where the Walnut Festival used to be held. It's now called Civic Park. So he does know the area. He currently lives in Sacramento, and although I don't think he's going to tell us how he got from there to here, he has a master's in psychology from Chico. So here is Marc Holmes, and he's going to tell us more about water and wetlands.
Thank you very much. We're going to be adjusting this microphone as we start here, so if we, if it takes a couple of minutes, please bear with us. And I have to ask, is it Matt? Do I turn this off?
Oh, no. You can. You want me to do it?
Please.
She did it down here. Down below where the little button is. There.
Thank you. Great. First, a brief introduction, and then we'll lower the lights and start the show. What we used to call slideshows, and mine contain no words at all. It's all images. This is not a PowerPoint, except by the fact that that's the mechanism that it's delivering by. I'd like to thank the Walnut Creek Library Foundation for the invitation and for hosting this event. Very gracious of you. We're happy to speak here. The Bay Institute is a nonprofit organization established in 1981, and some of you who have been in California since that time will recognize that as the year before the vote on the peripheral canal in California that went down to defeat. And it's no coincidence that our organization was established in 1981. We were appalled by what was about to take place with massive diversion of water from Northern California to, and I'll get into some details about this, not so much Southern California as the San Joaquin Valley. And so we'll talk about some of that today. The Bay Institute has broadened its program since then, and we address the entire San Francisco Bay Delta estuary. And the tunnels and the peripheral canal are really in the public's mind and in the mind of policymakers, Delta policy. But the bay and the delta together form an estuary that you're looking at here, the largest estuary on the west coast of the United States. And an estuary is a very different thing than an external delta like the Mississippi River Delta, which spills out into the Gulf of Mexico, or the Nile River Delta, which spills out into the Mediterranean Sea. An estuary is a place where fresh and salt water meet and create a very unique condition for life. There are some scientists believe that, in fact, life on Earth began in the shallow waters of coastal estuaries. They are so both chemically dynamic and abundant with the processes that generate and support life. So I'm going to talk to you not just about the freshwater half, but also the other half, the saltwater half that mixes with the freshwater, and the landscape that the water resides in. So let's lower the lights and get underway. Marianne asked me to give the big picture, so we're going to go back 20,000 years. We are living in a period of global warming at the end of an ice age that went on for about 2 million years, and we're fairly early on into the global warming period. About 18,000 years ago, sea level was about 400 feet below what it is today. The shore of California was out beyond the Farallon Islands. There was a river that flowed where the San Joaquin and the Sacramento rivers combined and flowed through this channel down a valley, a shallow valley, and out and spilled out into the ocean. Paleogeologists call that the California River. It's still there, it's just been submerged, and it's been inundated by the Pacific Ocean. At the end of the last ice age, the land ice started to melt, sea levels started to rise, and we then began this process of going through a number of series of San Francisco Bay establishment. At that time, this was a world of the megafauna. Humans didn't live with dinosaurs, but humans lived with the megafauna. We had native horses, American lions, mastodon, other animals that are almost all completely extinct today as a result of both climate change that was occurring, the warming that was occurring globally, but also the fact that humans were arriving in the area at the same time. There are some saber-tooth, if you've ever been down to La Brea tar pits, there are thousands of fossils of these trapped there. We have them here, we just don't have tar pits, and so we come across them less frequently than down there, but they roam the range. And probably the most fearsome predator of the late Ice Age, the short-faced bear. about 25% larger than our largest grizzly bears today, and very fleet of foot to run down anything it wanted to have for lunch that day. And we have this comparison in here not just to show you the relative size of this to a modern human, but because, in fact, humans were here at the same time as the short-faced bear during that period. We don't know exactly when they arrived, but we know that they were here at least since 14,500 years ago. And when I was in school, in high school, they taught us about the migration from Eastern Asia of modern human beings down the ice-free path between these two glaciers. But since then, or between these two ice sheets, but since then, there's been a lot of emphasis focused on the fact that there was probably an ocean migration along the shore as well. Recall, the shelf was a flat shelf that was easy to traverse. Boats were a lot easier traveling, and they had boats back then. Humans had boats in Asia and could travel down here. It's not that long ago. Humans migrated, Homo sapiens migrated out of Africa about 70 to 80,000 years ago. They've occupied Europe and Asia for a lot longer than they have here, and they got here about, as I say, 14,000 years ago that we can confirm. But since sea level has risen, all the archaeological remains that may be on that outer coastal shelf have been obscured. And so there may be older sites, older evidence, were we to be able to reach those sites and identify that humans arrived here a lot sooner than 14,000 years ago. So here's how the progression went. Here's the 18,000-year-old shoreline, and then we go 14,000, 11,000. About 8,000 years ago, the Pacific Ocean just arrived to start to penetrate through what we now call the Golden Gate. Still was no San Francisco Bay 8,000 years ago. San Francisco Bay was formed in this familiar outline that we know from our maps in Google Earth today. Somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 years ago, it reached the high tide shoreline that we recognize today. And so we see that there, and the Sacramento River coming down and entering the bay from here, the San Joaquin coming down and entering the bay from here. And I've actually put a trick map up for you because we all recognize this from our maps. This is the one we see today, but this was not the estuary that was formed at the end of the last ice age 4,000 years ago. The shoreline of that estuary looked like this. This is the high tide shoreline 3,000 years ago at the end of the last ice age. And now, all of a sudden, our delta appears. The mysterious delta that most of the people in California have no idea where it is. Of course, they're looking offshore, like the Mississippi or the Nile. But our delta, if you compare deltas to belly buttons, we have an innie in California. And it's hard to find on normal maps. So this was the high tide shoreline of San Francisco Bay. The bay and the San Francisco estuary, the bay and delta were much larger than they are today. And you see these little inlets extending up here. This map was done by the U.S. Geological Survey and has an indication of settlement in essentially about 1840. So here's the town of Stockton. Sacramento is located right up here. Napa would be here, Sonoma would be here, Nevada would be here, the town of Oakland, and Yerba Buena, which had not yet become named San Francisco, a little town of Yerba Buena. They're all on the shore. They're all on the deep water channels. They were located because commerce and transportation occurred on water up until very recently. And so you can go around the bay and identify every major city around the bay, and they're all on a deep water channel because they transported goods and services and themselves the easiest way that they could across the bay rather than having to navigate on horseback or wagon around this enormous body of water. So that's the first thing to know about the estuary, that it was something very different under natural conditions than it is today. At mean tide, when the high tide dropped, the vegetated tidal marshes of the bay appeared. And we had 346,000 acres of tidal marshes in the delta, and in San Francisco Bay proper, roughly in 3 geographic regions: Suisun, North Bay on San Pablo Shore, and South Bay in what today is San Jose, Santa Clara area. Another 196,000 acres of tidal marshes in the estuary. These tidal marshes were the nursery grounds of all fish passing through the estuary and many other aquatic species, but the invertebrates. And this is what makes an estuary as richly productive as it is the shallow areas. And the shallow areas are the areas where they're shallow enough that vegetation can take hold and grow, and therefore you have this cycle of the vegetation decomposing and introducing nutrients into the water, and it's a very productive place, nutrient-rich and therefore food-rich in the food web, and that's what was here. So when you hear these reports about the flocks of birds in the sky, the fish, the salmon that people reported that they could almost walk across the backs of the salmon across the Carquinez Strait at migration time in the winter. They were there for that reason, and this was what an estuary is and what it does. This is what the tidal marshes of San Francisco Bay looked like. Complex dendritic channels, and they'd been forming. Remember, sea level was rising, but it slowed rising at the end of the warming period. We basically got into this period of stability, and once sea levels rose at a much slower rate, then the tidal marsh vegetation could take root around the edge of the marshes and grow. And so these had been growing for anywhere from 2,000 to 4,000 years in various locations around the bay. Every year, the detritus layers another bit of elevation on the marsh plain, and so this marsh plain is actually about 2.5 feet above mean sea level. These are our barrier islands in the bay, hugely productive from an ecological point of view. This is the largest remaining intact remnant of tidal marsh in the bay on the misnamed Petaluma River, and this is 2,000 acres. I'll show you what the change has been. There were people here at this time, and this is one of the actually quite authentic representations of some of the tribal leaders coming out to meet the Franciscan friars and the troops who came in. This was painted by an eyewitness at the time. All authentic. They were estimated to have been in the Bay Area alone about between 25 and 40,000 individuals at that time, scattered about in tribes of up to 200 at the biggest, but most of the tribes were much smaller. Family tribes, so there could be as small as 10 or 12, 25, 50. And they lived all around the bay. The loincloths, I think, were added by the painter as a result of Franciscan modesty. We know the extent of the occupation because there was an archaeologist, an anthropologist from UC Berkeley by the name of Nelson, who went around and surveyed all of these sites around the bay, what he called in here shell heaps, what we now call, scientists now call midden mounds, that were along the shoreline and were really the debris piles for the family units, the tribal units around there. He counted almost 300 of them, and since then there have been another 100 added to that list. So we had a very healthy population, a vibrant population of the original migrants into the Bay Area. The most famous of the midden mounds was at Emeryville, and we don't have a photograph of the original one before it was altered, but this is the midden mound starting here on the south side of the channel. We're looking east off the bay, and here's the other edge of the midden mound over here. It was a little over 300 feet across. It was 42 feet high. The top 8 feet had been shaved off in this. Settlers put a dance hall on top of it, and it was called the Shell Mound Dance Hall. So this is, fortunately, Mr. Nelson actually was able to excavate this, and there are thousands of artifacts contained in the UC Berkeley Bancroft Library that reflect the culture here. And it was complex, it was spiritual, it was really quite a marvelous civilization that was here around the Bay Area. The midden mound was destroyed in 1925 to make place for a paint factory in Berkeley. And today, if you drive into Emeryville, you'll find Shell Mound Street, and just north of IKEA is where the location of this shell mound had been. But there are, it is long gone. But you get an idea. It had been there for at least, 3,000, 4,000 years. So now let's back out. We want to cover all, there's your introduction to the estuary landscape. The estuary landscape occurs within the Central Valley watershed. The Sierra spills all its water down into the Central Valley. The Coast Range, what little rainfall it gets on the east side, spills that down in, and it's collected in the San Joaquin River, which runs south to north, the Sacramento River, which runs north to south, and then it meets in the delta. This is an 1878-ish map that we're looking at here, and they just showed these wetland areas, these vast wetland areas, as gray areas. This is before they were altered, they were destroyed in a manner I'll describe in a minute, but you get an idea of the vastness of this watershed. 40 million acres, 40% of the surface area of the entire state of California. The only outlet to the ocean is through the Golden Gate. So here we're back at the estuary, the full estuary, the delta on the right, the bay on the left, and the wetlands there. And we went about, starting roughly in 1850 at the time of the gold rush, undertaking massive alteration of the estuary. And the first thing that we did was build dikes around the shallow areas of the delta and the bay, the areas that were easy to get to, that they could literally send out Chinese laborers with shovels into this, and they started building levees around the shallow area to prevent the bay tides, the estuary tides, from inundating them. This was reclamation. Well, that accelerated, and they got automated about it with steam barges, and they excavated mud, and after they built the levee around it, they'd slurry the mud from the adjacent mud flats to fill this, and this process incrementally was what destroyed 95% of our estuary's wetlands. We still do this today. The levees, they go along the marshes with a drag bucket. They drag up silt from the tidal channel side, and they just build the levee as they go along until they enclose the entire wetland along the deep water channel. This is a photograph from 1924 looking north at San Bruno Mountain. There's a fog bank over San Francisco back there if you look closely. This will become Highway 101, Bayshore Freeway, and you can see that they've taken, here's the borrow pit that they've dredged the mud from, and just outside that on the bay side is the levee that they've built with the dredged mud in order to enclose this. This is all Brisbane area. It was all tidal marsh, all shallow margins of the bay. They've just completed building the levees. That today, in much larger, expanded, more fill out here is San Francisco International Airport. So we took, in the bay, 196,000 acres of tidal marshes and built dikes around them, this very simple engineering technique, and destroyed all but 16,000 acres of them. The Petaluma Marsh that I showed you in the beginning, the largest remaining remnant, is right here on the shores up here. The rest of the 14,000 remnant acres are scattered in like flakes around the bay in tracts as small as 25 acres, none any larger than 300 acres. You can't even see them in here. So we converted the tidal marshes to agricultural lands, hay farms in the bay. In pink, salt ponds, 40,000 acres of solar salt evaporation ponds, and then in the purple here, primarily in Central and South Bay, were the areas that were actually filled with development. In the delta, we did the same thing. This is the historic delta. The blue area that you see here was the extent of tidal marsh vegetation, tidally influenced on the north and south edge up here. You see freshwater, non-tidal marshes up there, cattail marshes from Sacramento, and then along the Sacramento River channel, a massive stream riverside forest. Oak trees, sycamore trees of all kind, and this is the old Sacramento channel. There's a new bypass in it now. But there was a massive forest there. So we took that, and then grasslands around the edge of the delta, all here, and willow thickets, dense, extensive willow thickets around the delta. 346,000 acres of tidal marshes in the delta, and they're all gone today. The conversion was to everything that you see here in this pale cream color, is, as any of you have known who've driven out Highway 12, is agricultural lands today. Highly productive agricultural lands, because they put these levees around them, and then what they had was this rich peat soil that was 3,000 years old from all the decaying matter from the tules and the alkali bulrush and the cattails. And so today, and one of the political issues with it, is it's a highly productive, very economical economically valuable agricultural area, but completely transformed. We've destroyed essentially the entire shallow margins of the estuary, all the vegetated habitat, which, as I mentioned before, was fishery nurseries ground for everything in the estuary. So here's hay farm along Highway 37 in the North Bay. This is Novato Creek. The levee was constructed on either side of Novato Creek, enclosing the whole thing. You see the popular lagoon communities that were developed after World War II. This is Belmarine Keys. There was Foster City. We have them in the Delta and Discovery Bay. That was all exactly looked like the Petaluma Marsh that I showed you in the earlier slide. So agriculture, residences. This is the crystallizer ponds at the Cargill South Bay Salt Pond Complex, end of the line evaporation process. At that point, they start to crystallize out the salt and harvest it. All of this was tidal marsh historically. The tidal marsh areas were wildly popular to build airports on because they were easy to, big flat expanses to do this kind of construction on. And so this is Moffett Field in the South Bay. You can see the South Bay Salt Pond Complex out here with its internal levees, all open water. Again, all of that was tidal marsh. And we also like to build garbage dumps in wetlands. 48 garbage dumps were built in wetlands until the practice was outlawed in 1969. This is the Newbie Island landfill at Milpitas. And you can see there's nothing, this is not an engineered landfill with square boundaries and right angles. It was built along the channels of the tidal marshes and just shaped to meander to reclaim again those shallow tidal marsh areas. And we built commercial development. This is Oracle headquarters in Redwood City, built surrounded by tidal marsh channel. Again, that's the intensive, showed you the purple areas in the map. They're intensively developed in commercial development and residential development like this. Back up to the watershed level, the alterations that we did. Now I've showed you the draining of the tidal marshes in San Francisco Bay up to the watershed level. Here's the historic unaltered landscape, 13 major rivers spilling out of the Sierra. You know most of them, the Mokelumne, the Tuolumne, the Merced, the Feather River, the Sacramento, the San Joaquin. They all flowed down there unobstructed. And this is the water connection. We'll expand on this as we go along a little bit. Depending upon the rainfall and precipitation year, we could have a drought year like this and hardly any water came down. We could have a hugely abundant precipitation, in which case you get over 100 million acre feet of water draining out the Golden Gate unobstructed. The flows that the Department of Water Resources uses today, the flow estimate for average outflow in California is 27 million acre feet, average outflow from. Now, we never have an average year, but that gives you an idea of the range. An acre foot, by the way, is the amount of water that would fill an acre to 1 foot deep. So gives you some idea of what kind of water we're talking about. Massive amounts of water. Our reservoir is the Sierra snowpack. All the reservoirs that we've constructed artificially are nothing in comparison to the scope and scale of this snow reservoir that we get up here. And that's why our water availability varies so dramatically when we go into drought years. This is what we did to the stream systems, and I'm only showing you a handful of the major dams along here. We dammed the Sacramento River and Pitt, the Feather River, and the San Joaquin River, and the Mokelumne, and the Tuolumne. We dammed every major river in California in order to impound water, primarily for the purpose of providing water for agriculture in the Central Valley. And so these are the origins of the problem that we're facing today, is we have cut off the flows that would normally come down in here, built a system of canals and diversions that take the water somewhere other than to the delta and to the estuary. So we've essentially put the estuary in a permanent state of drought, whether there's lots of water coming down or not, because we're sending that water elsewhere. The red lines in here marking the rivers indicate the rivers that were historic salmon runs, the migratory salmon, that were cut off as a result of these dams. So literally thousands of miles of spawning habitat were destroyed. No surprise that our salmon populations, plummeted. We prevented them from breeding anymore. And so, again, there's an intimate connection between development of our human water supply needs and the impact on the natural environment. I don't expect you to see this, but I want to give you some idea. Mary Ann made a reference to this early on. These are all the state water projects that, and federal water projects that we've put in California. We have the most plumbed environment anywhere on the planet, anywhere, you know, more than Saudi Arabia. We put canals, diversions, because the water falls and the snow falls primarily up here. The water, I should say, put that differently. The water and snow are abundant up here more reliably than they are down here. Of course, this is the High Sierra. We have massive snow packs in the High Sierra when it in fact snows, but it's more unreliable down here, and so most of this water was diverted to be used for valley agriculture, and primarily the San Joaquin Valley. The Sacramento River Valley has enough of its own water. The San Joaquin is essentially a desert valley. So just to tie us in here, here's the Contra Costa Canal intake in the western delta above Discovery Bay at Rock Slough. This is where the canal starts, sucks its water out of the delta, and these are the service areas that it has, including parts of Walnut Creek, etc. And that serves about 250,000 people. You know, in this area, you're served both by Contra Costa and by East Bay Mud. And of the two of those, the East Bay Mud is the one with the more reliable supply that's not facing problems because of the location of its intake. Again, we're starting to get in one of the problems of and the reasons and the rationale for the development of the peripheral canal and now the tunnels. One of the things that's going to happen when you start diverting fresh water upstream here, and Contra Costa Water District has been complaining about it for decades now, is it taints the quality of the water here by drawing salt water farther up into the estuary. So here's our delta landscape looking west, Mount Diablo in the background here. That's a little hard to see on this. There's a little pickup truck right there that you can see, but this is standard levees. This is a tidally influenced slough. There could be salt water in here, but even if this is all fresh water, it's being pushed up and down daily on the tides. It's at sea level. The levees are holding back the water, and then the islands, what are now called the Delta Islands, former tidal marshes, have now subsided so deeply from being diked for over 100 years in most cases that as soon as if these levees aren't maintained, then these islands are flooded by breaches. The islands range up to 25 feet below sea level of subsidence on the western side of the delta, and on the eastern side less subsidence, but still well below sea level. And this gives you an idea of just what I described. The blue areas here are the deeper, the darker blue, the deeper the subsidence, over 20 feet in dark blue. And then as you move from west to east in the delta, the subsidence is less, but still we're 5 feet below sea level in these green areas over here. So we have this massive area of 1,300 miles of levees holding back the Pacific Ocean so that it doesn't flood these valuable agricultural lands. At the same time, because we're diverting water from this area, we're drawing salt water up, altering the ecosystem, and contaminating the supplies of people who draw their water directly from the delta, which historically was done a lot because their fresh water went far down west into the estuary than it does today. But this is the bathymetry of today's delta. And here's what happens when the delta levees fail. And there have been 170 levee breaches failures in the past 100 and essentially 12 years since 1900, and not all at the early time. We've had about 30 or 40 in the last 30 years. This is the most recent one at Jones Island. The levee had been inspected the week before by the Department of Water Resources. It's one of the most well-maintained levees in the delta, and it just collapsed. They still are not committing to what the cause was, but some suspect beavers. So here we have the Pacific Ocean flowing into a breached levee. The depth is recorded at 12 feet. You can see telephone poles sticking up here. There are lots of structures that you can't see that were inundated by the flood. It cost $90 million to repair it. Took 6 months. This is the nightmare scenario that one of the nightmare scenarios that the twin tunnels and peripheral canal are supposed to help ameliorate. Jones Tract is to due east of Discovery Bay, off the east shore of. As if we don't have enough problems with massive freshwater diversion, with levee breaches caused by big rodents, and contaminated drinking water, we are also in a period of global warming that's causing sea level rise. And even if you don't believe in global warming, you cannot not believe in sea level rise, because we have a tide gauge that was installed in the Golden Gate in 1857 that has been read every single day continuously since then. And there are many others around the world that have done the same thing. Between 1900 and 2000, sea level rose 8 inches. Mean sea level rose 8 inches. The projection is that it's going to go up even higher, and those are the kind of the scary stories that you hear when they forecast the projections for 2050, 2100, etc. And I'll show you one of those in a minute. This is actually in China Camp State Park in Marin County. He's driving on a paved asphalt road that's well maintained by the State Department of Parks and Recreation, and this is just a normal high tide in January 2009. And that reflects the fact that sea level is 8 inches higher than it was 100 years ago. These are the forecasts, the projections for sea level rise, and the one you want to pay attention to. There are two different colors here, a dark blue and a light blue. The dark blue is kind of hard to see. It's smaller back here in the back, but these are the sea level rise projections. 2050, the forecast will go another 14 inches from 8 inches now. In that case, all of these areas would be inundated by sea level if we don't build our levees much higher. And here's the nightmare scenario, and it's not just scare tactics. It's actually based on current projections of greenhouse gas emissions globally. If we don't find some way to decline that rate of increase, the sea level will rise by approximately 30 meters after all the land ice on the planet melts. And this is the new shoreline that will be there at that time. Now, of course, a lot of good people are thinking about how to prevent this from happening, but we've started this process already. The curve goes like this. We're 8 inches here, it goes to 14, 55 inches in 2100, and it just goes off the map. That's why greenhouse gas emissions are so important to get a handle on. Rather than have this be an entire story of doom and gloom, I want to talk to you about the efforts that are underway, including the well-intentioned efforts of those who think that the tunnels are a good idea, and if they're managed right, they potentially could be. There's a large-scale effort on in San Francisco estuary to restore massive amounts of that wetland complex that used to be there. And one of the fabulous things about it, it's so easy to do. You just go out and breach a dike like at Jones Tract. Now, we're not recommending doing this in the Delta, but it's being done regularly in San Francisco Bay. This is on the north shore of San Pablo Bay, just off Sonoma Creek. They just go out and breach a dike at low tide, and the tide comes up, and an area that was a hay farm, it becomes a wetland the next day, and then nature starts to take its course to do the restoration. And we've seen some of these, had some time to look at some of these from start to closer to finish, the maturity. The salt ponds, for instance, the ancient channels, these 3,000-year-old channels, in spite of the fact that the salt ponds have destroyed all the vegetation, the channels still persist there. These were just passive solar salt evaporation ponds. They didn't run heavy equipment, cattle, anything over them. So these 3,000-year-old channels are right there. Well, that enables scientists to actually plan the restoration and the levee breach to align with the channels and literally restore the tidal marsh that was there 3,000 years ago. And that's what they're doing. So you take this one right here. This is a salt pond in the North Bay, a photograph from 1998. This is the channel levees surrounding it right here. And you can see the ancient channels in that salt pond. In 1998, Cargill decided they didn't need this anymore for production. The Department of Fish and Game at that time were experimenting with restoration projects, but you can notice on there, there's no vegetation in this at all. This is a barren salt pond, just like the one I just showed you on the previous slide, if it were daylight when I took the picture. And there's no vegetation there at all. And they said, well, let's just poke some breaches and see what happens. 1998. Here's that same salt pond in 2012. And so look at this channel right here. You see this oxbow in this channel to get you oriented right here, and we'll go back and see that same oxbow exactly the same channel through there. We're changing our perspective on this and actually looking in the next slide more from this direction, not quite 15 years later. And you can see the breaches that were punched. There's a breach, there's a breach, there's a breach, and here's a breach up here. There are a couple more breaches off screen. And then they walked away. And the tides brought back in the seeds for the plants. The invertebrates come back in the mud. The silt is exchanged. And this is what's underway bay-wide. The goal is to restore, of those 196,000 acres that were destroyed, the goal is to restore 100,000 acres of bay tidal marshes. These become incredibly important in the era of sea level rise and global warming because these, remember I showed you in the first slide, I told you Petaluma Marsh and those were barrier islands in the bay. They prevented storm surge from reaching the shores. Well, we can do that again. We can build those barrier islands back up again. The biggest problem that we're going to have in the near term from sea level rise is not static on a nice day. It's when we have a high tide combined with a major storm coming through that's going to batter the shoreline and send waves and destructive force far beyond the shoreline of the bay. These tidal marshes are an important strategy to restore the protective benefits that, that we can provide in an era of sea level rise. So part of those historic wetlands are right down here on Suisun Bay in Walnut Creek. You can still see them here today. Part of Concord Naval Weapons Station is built upon them, and the Shell plant, some of you were around in 1989, the big Shell spill into what is now McNabney Marsh. That was Shell, everybody referred to as Shell Marsh at the time, off Highway 680, right up here. And they spilled oil down into that. Now all of these areas are recognized that both for their buffer benefit that they provide for sea level rise, for the wildlife habitat benefit, for the cleansing benefits, ecological benefits. They're talking about this now as green infrastructure. We're going to stop building levees and channelized streams, as we've done in Walnut Creek. Walnut Creek, which runs from essentially San Ramon, parallels the 680 corridor all the way down and flows into Suisun Bay. All of that is now recognized as having been mistaken engineering for a number of reasons. And so they're going back to green infrastructure, restoring the floodplains, et cetera. Well, we've built in the floodplains, that creates some problems, but nevertheless they recognize that it's a new approach that we need to take. So I just wanted to show that up there, that these tributary streams, even though they're not part of the original wetlands in there, are incredibly important for their role in the estuary ecosystem. And finally, because I haven't spoken much about it today, I talked about the fish, the nursery grounds that the wetlands had. Well, the wetlands are also home to endemic species that live nowhere else on Earth. And this is kind of the poster child for San Francisco Bay's endemic species. It's a California clapper rail. Rails, there's a species, a family of marsh birds called rails. They're all over the country, yellow rails, black rails, Sora rails. And because we've destroyed so many wetlands nationwide, not to mention globally, rail populations have plummeted. Our home child here, the clapper rail that exists nowhere else, once existed from Morro Bay to Humboldt Bay, is extirpated there. We have had it vacillate between about 500 in 1989 to about 1,600 or 1,700 a few years ago, and now for some reason the scientists don't know why the population is back under 1,000, and they're getting worried about it. But this is kind of the barometer of how well we're doing. It's one of the big drivers from an environmental point of view of doing this massive marsh restoration in San Francisco Bay. We hope to succeed. We've restored a lot of marshes to date, somewhere on the order of about 15,000 acres of tidal marshes in addition to the one that I showed you, the salt pond, and it's a very enthusiastic undertaking. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I hope that I've given you a big picture. We can talk about this for a long time in discussion. I'm happy to answer questions and engage in discussion with you, but that's kind of the big picture of what's going on in the San Francisco estuary: water, habitat alteration, and global climate change. It's an interesting mix. We're living in interesting times. Thank you. I'll read them, sure.
Okay.
If I get one with bad handwriting, I'll give it to you. Can Jerry Brown's twin tunnels be managed to, okay, you can read it. Hang on. I think it's what it's saying, managed to both protect the delta and supply water to users of the South. Not just the twin tunnels, but the peripheral canal and the way we operate the delta now, which is actually to take Sacramento River water and channel it through the delta in existing channels to the pumps on the south and send it south. The question is not, can you export water for uses outside the estuary? Of course you can. The question is how much? And there are many of us that believe now we're way overprescribed. Way overprescribed. I told you the average outflow from the snowpack through the estuary is 27 million acre feet. And up until recently, we've withdrawn up to 60% of that amount, including in drought years. We've caused the Sacramento River to dry up in stretches and to run backwards in others. I said Sacramento, I meant San Joaquin River. We've been operating the water supply system that we get from the delta wildly negligent of preserving the ecological values of the estuary. We're overprescribed. Can we divert some for uses? Can we divert a lot? There's a lot of water in normal to heavy rainfall years. A lot of it escapes simply because we can't capture it in the heavy snowpack years. If we can capture that and send it out, yes. But right now, I'll give you an example. There's a Westlands water district on the San Joaquin Valley Coast Range side, ergo Westlands, that set up because they got cheap water and grow cotton and alfalfa that are wildly wasteful of irrigation water because they were subsidized and they could make money from it. It's a corporate-owned facility, as most agricultural facilities are in the San Joaquin. These are large corporations. A family farm is gone, long gone from the San Joaquin Valley. So Shell, Tenneco, and other corporations use them. So the hope is on the environmental side of it, and even on the governor's side of it, is to now balance those uses, replenish the ecosystem. We've been draining it for too long and doing too much damage. Give some back. Well, if you give some back, it's got to come from someplace, and that's the strategy. Could you take it through tunnels? You could, if you could resist the temptation to take too much, and that's really the politics of it.
So what has been the temperature change over the past 2,000 years?
This is related to climate change, asking what the global temperature change has been over the last 2,000 years, and I don't know. I've read it a few times, and it just kind of goes in one ear and out the next. I think the International Panel on Climate Change has warned that we'd better stop it from being greater than 2 degrees centigrade, or we're in big trouble. So something less than that, but I'm not an authority on that. My apologies. Okay. There was a comment period last night on the tunnel proposal, and there's the question said there's a well-funded slick PR campaign for the tunnels underway, and that's absolutely true. There are Westlands is one of them. San Joaquin agriculture in general. Again, to give you an idea of the proportion of water in California, the developed water from the snowpack in the Central Valley is divvied up 80%, and I think they've gotten it down with conservation measures to around 75%. 75% to San Joaquin Valley agriculture, and the remaining to urban and industrial uses, some over the Tehachapi's to LA. This is really not a question of LA swimming pools or lawns. This is about how we water, how we irrigate agriculture in the San Joaquin Valley. That's where the vast majority of our water goes. And they have put together a very slick campaign, highly paid professionals lobbying the governor and the legislators there. This tunnel proposal did not arrive now just out of thin air. It's being promoted by those who recognize the threats of global warming, the threat to salinity intrusion in the delta to their water supplies, and they want a cleaner water supply, and that is in California, the Sacramento River.
Do you have a website with more information?
Thank you. That's our website, and it's an easy one to remember, and a lot of the information that I've shared with you today is on that website in more detail. Some of the facts and figures we've talked about, our study about how to restore wetlands during an era of sea level rise. We call it the horizontal levee, because we recognize that these wetlands can protect flooding of the developed shoreline as well and better in most cases, and certainly far more cheaply than highly engineered and expensive levees that we've built all over the place. Levees, by the way, which amount to, we have more linear miles of levee in the estuary than does the nation of Holland holding back the North Sea.
Are we in better shape than New Orleans?
Are we in better shape than New Orleans? They have the same problems, and actually there are those who would argue that they're in worse shape. They have the same levee configuration. Actually, most of Louisiana is below sea level, way up. Their problem is hurricanes, is the storms. And so they get a lot more damage done to their system than we do. We live in this fairly enclosed, the Golden Gate is the only outlet, so that moderates the impact of storms as they come in here. But if we want to get into scare tactics again, the geologists are now talking about we're all familiar with the Pineapple Express here, the tropical storms that come across from Hawaii and just nail us with very warm storms. Well, there's one that they now identified in geologic history, shows up about every 200 to 400 years, and it's the mother of all storms. It comes in with 10 to 100 times the amount of water, of rainfall as our normal Pineapple Expresses, and they've just devastated the landscape. The reason the geologists have found this is they've looked at sediment history over the eons, and they found these histories of massive floods, and their hypothesis is that this was a mega Pineapple Express, essentially. So it's not that we don't get hurricanes here, but there are other Pacific storm threats that equally put us in jeopardy.
What other bays in the world have any estuaries as opposed to the deltas?
Yeah, I know I've never done an inventory. The question is, what other bays in the world are innies? Or estuaries in the world, but I do know that there is one, and it's remarkably parallel to San Francisco Bay, and that's Guanabara Bay in Rio de Janeiro. It has a very narrow inlet into Guanabara Bay and rivers that spill into the Guanabara Bay behind that inlet. I can't remember the names of the rivers right now, but very similar coastal morphology conditions.
One last question.
Good writing. Aside from salinity, are you aware of studies on the degradation of the ecosystem due to the building of human-produced contaminants, i.e. nutrients, pesticides, etc., in particular impacts on areas to be restored for fish restoration? Yeah. Yeah, again, we did the 50,000 foot level here. We put so many chemicals into the estuary that that's the really scary story, because we've got no real approval process for chemicals other than what you ingest in your body intentionally. So things that go out on the market are just sold and marketed, and we learn too late that they were damaging. So DDT is an early good example. Here we have flame retardants now going into the estuary, pyrethroids that apparently disrupt severely the reproductive cycle of numerous fish species, the pesticides and oil-based chemicals that are so much a part of fertilizers and other chemicals. We have a toxic stew in the Delta and in the Bay, and we really can't pull out the strings to identify which is doing which. And the problem with that is that those who want to say, well, you can't blame it on me because you haven't figured out that we're to blame, actually their arguments hold traction. Our economy now is actually founded on massive application of pesticides and herbicides on the landscape and escape from landfills into the water. So we can't, it's overwhelming. It's overwhelming. So, yes. Sorry I couldn't be more specific, but there's thousands of them.
Do you have time for 2 more quick questions?
I have all the time in the world, listen. Who really has power to decide policy on water? boy, this is no politics here, right?
It's okay now.
Yeah, okay, we're into politics now. Well, it's a complex situation, and there are those, me being one of them, who say that corporations have amassed such policy in public government at this point that they're really in charge, mostly. And that's not just campaign finance influence, but the teams of lobbyists and scientists that these folks can hire and walk in, the access that they have to legislators who have a hard time understanding, as you and I do, complex topics that weigh heavily on our public policy decisions. And these scientists are no schleps. They come in and they make arguments that an otherwise not even ill-informed, but just non-scientist person has a hard time discerning. The problem with that, in my opinion, is mostly the access. You know, it's illegal for me to fly to Washington, D.C., to go to Sacramento and go in and lobby for legislation. I can't do it. We'd lose our nonprofit status. Corporations, that's part of their business operations, and they invest massively in that. So ultimately, the power for the decision is with the elected officials, but their minds are addled by just misinformation, disinformation, and the campaign contributions, of course. So technically, the recommendation will be made by the California Department of Water Resources, the big agency that is in charge of that entire map and all the canals and all the dams that I showed you in that map. They will make the decision. They will hold hearings. Those two tunnels are not going to be built for, if they are built, they are not going to be built for a long, long time. They have to do two environmental impact reports, one state, one federal. They have to go through endangered species consultation with the Fish and Wildlife Service, a massive bureaucracy of permitting process that they need to go to. Now mind you, those who promote those projects are adept at getting through those processes, and their 10-year and 20-year horizons, fine on their corporate books. It's just fine. It's the corporation. It's not you and I who are going to live and die in the meantime. But there will be hearings held by the Department of Water Resources. There will be lawsuits, and there may be another initiative, like the Peripheral Canal Initiative. It's going to be a messy, muddled mess. In the meantime, sea level keeps rising, levees keep failing, and it's not, in my opinion, it's not unreasonable to think that standing here in 2014, that 36 years from now in 2050, when sea level is 16 inches higher than it is today, or sooner than that because of storms, this is all rendered moot. You have people raising hands. I have one more here. What is the best way to prepare for the tsunami coming towards San Francisco Bay, Barrier Island? Restore those marshes as quickly as we can. Breach those dikes as quickly as we can. And stop developing on the shoreline. Okay, you have hands, and I can repeat the questions if they just want to shout them.
Okay. About 6 years ago, there was the judgment on to protect the Delta smelt, and it was a big deal, I remember, and I followed it somewhat. But maybe you can go back over it. Has it helped, and what effect does it has, and where are we at
Sure.
for that now?
The question is about Delta smelt protections as a result of lawsuits. Because we don't have a public policy in government that protects the landscape and the water resources generally, we get at, from the environmental or the public trust point of view, we get at protecting our environment from poorly designed development through these little windows that Congress and the state have provided us. And there are two major pieces of legislation. One was the Endangered Species Act of 1973, I believe it was, and the other is the Clean Water Act. Those things have been used and twisted to get at protections because the Delta smelt salmon have no protections in statute otherwise. And so the question is, have those strategies been successful? Yes and no. Those who would take more water from the Delta smelt are particularly sensitive to fresh water and the location of fresh water and the gradient of the salinity location in the Delta as it moves back and forth east and west across the Delta. They only live in the Delta, they only live for a year or two, and so if you destroy their habitat in there, then they're just gone. Well, the endangered species gives us a tool to actually use that to prevent excessive water diversion, and it's been used successfully. That's the good news. The bad news is that in one recent year they couldn't find any delta smelt at all. I mean, the numbers are down in the hundreds. Chinook salmon populations that once were in the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions in migratory, were down in 1994 to 192 fish counted. You can see from the physical alteration of the landscape why that has happened. Dams and nursery ground destruction, spawning ground destruction. So we try to get at protecting the entire ecosystem with these barely adequate legal tools of Endangered Species Act and Clean Water Act, and we're fighting a rearguard action. Yes?
What's the role of CalFed in delta protection?
Again, a very simplistic answer. Because of the flurry of lawsuits back and forth and the over-appropriated state of the water system in California, things came to a screeching halt in the early 1990s. Politically, we had a favorable federal administration at that time that came in with Clinton administration. So they said, state of California, they pointed to the state and said, if you don't fix your water problem and protect the fish and the habitat and deal with all your allocation issues, we'll come in and do it for you. And of course, the governor at that time, Pete Wilson, said, no, we'll do it. And so they had, to great fanfare, they established what they called the Cal-Fed Bay Delta Program. Cal state side, Fed side, they invested billions of dollars. They took bond money that you passed for water projects and parks and open space, and they spent a whole bunch of it on scientific evaluation of the things that I've discussed today. And they established an authority and appointed, I forget how many members, 18, 20 members to it. And then they had serious meetings about what to do. And then that went on for between 2003 and 2009. Schwarzenegger came in, pulled the plug on the whole thing, politics turned, and now we have the Delta Commission. And the CalFed is gone. We now have the Delta Commission. The range of the program, the target areas of the program has shrunk. The bay is no longer part of it. The valleys are no longer part of it. It's just the delta itself. And it's a renamed Bay Delta program and shrunken down. And there's a Delta Stewardship Council associated with it, and they're going through their machinations. And that's one of the things that the gentleman with the question about the PR brochures for the tunnel. The tunnel is an intimate part of the discussion, if not the central part of the discussion of the new Delta Council. Yes?
It's very basic. What is a delta compared to another body of water, and where does that water come from?
Yeah, and I apologize. I should have explained that at the very beginning. A delta and the Mississippi or Nile are the typical, the iconic examples of it. It's where deltas are where the sediment and everything else that comes down from a river body in a continental area, and the river can be big or small. The big ones are the easiest example. Mississippi River spills its load of sediment into a receiving body of water, typically an ocean or a sea. So the Gulf of Mexico, there's a huge amount of sediment they typically go out in fan-shaped form into the sea, and they just build up over time. Well, that's what happened here, but it was interior in California, and the two rivers that dumped their loads of sediment into it were the San Joaquin from the south and the Sacramento from the north. And recall that 8,000 years ago, that was dry land. The river cut all the way through the Golden Gate. But as sea level rose, there became an inland sea there. And as soon as there's an inland sea, then the sediment hits the slow water, the calm water of the sea, drops out, and builds up until it's shallow enough that you get vegetated areas. So the Rhone River Delta, I mean, they're all over the world. Holland is built on a delta. The Netherlands is built on a delta. I think it's the Rhone River Delta. And so that's the difference between a delta and any other body of water. Yes?
You know, I read somewhere recently that 50% of the rivers in the United States cannot sustain life. If that is true, can you say whether it is or not? And are there rivers in California that cannot sustain life?
I can't say whether that particular figure is true or not. I know that in general, the ecological health of rivers globally is dramatically impaired. Dramatically impaired. You know, the fuel for passing the Clean Water Act in whenever it was the Cuyahoga River catching fire. Well, it had been catching fire for decades, but somebody happened to go out one day and take some pictures and get some video, and it just you know, inflamed it. Went to Congress. There was a bill on the president's desk within the year. The kind of disposal of raw pollutants here, America has some of the best environmental protections in the world. We have the Clean Water Act. We have bodies set up in government agencies that go out and test that water and regulate industries and to prevent that kind of wholesale deteriorations going on. Nothing like that anywhere else. And so, yes, rivers are in bad shape. In California, the San Joaquin no longer supports a salmon run. Now, part of that is the fact that it dries up, runs backwards, but even putting water back into it, there's serious problems with the contaminants in there. I know the contaminant I wanted to mention that I forgot, selenium. Selenium is a naturally occurring element on the west side of the San Joaquin Valley in the geology of the west side. It never was in the San Joaquin River before because that land was desert and it was not farmland. Well, the corporations came along, bought subsidized water from the state and federal government, transformed that selenium-laden landscape into an irrigated landscape. The drainage ran off into the San Joaquin and drains, it's all over the delta from that. Kesterson Wildlife Refuge was the big revelation at the time in the early 1980s, where they realized the drainage coming out of Westland's irrigated lands was selenium laden. Well, it does massive birth defects in anything that ingests it. So they were actually draining it to a wildlife refuge at that time, thinking, oh, more water for wildlife, and they were killing all the birds in the entire refuge. So yeah, our rivers are in big trouble, I don't know how many or what, but nationwide. Yes, and then I'll come back.
With rising sea levels, what role might desalination play?
Yeah, the question is, with rising sea levels, what role can desalination play? There are a lot of people who are big boosters of desalination, and again, recall the big threat is not to our potable water supply. The big threat is to the volume of water that we're diverting as agricultural. But still, do we have enough, could we generate enough desalinized water for something other than potable uses? I think there are two issues that people raise. One, that it could just be enough for domestic uses if we did that. And two is, there's a serious toxic byproduct from desalination, intensely toxic salt, because you're concentrating the salt and you have to dispose of it somewhere. We already have that problem in the San Joaquin Valley, the irrigation water that I mentioned before that goes, they collect those in drainage channels, and not only is it contaminated with chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, etc., it's contaminated with salt. So the solution in the Central Valley, they built a series of ponds like our salt ponds in the bay, but all they are is holding ponds, and they keep on growing in scope and scale in the valley, and they don't know what to do with the byproduct. So they're also expensive, but there are some being built. Santa Barbara built one 20 years ago and has never used it, but it's a backup system because of their particularly precarious potable water supply situation. And of course, in the Middle East, the Saudis and others have built significant desalination plants. It's not widely used in the U.S. Back to
back to this tunnel project. I'm curious, in your opinion, I mean, would you describe the building of two tunnels approximately each the size of the Caldecott Tunnel bore that just was completed to transport water to the southern delta? One is, there's some formulation for how they came up with this is the amount of cubic feet of water they need to get to here to get to there. And two, is it an issue that should concern us here in Walnut Creek as for those of us who are in Contra Costa Water District pumps, so to speak?
Yeah, if I can summarize the question, it's based Are the tunnels a good idea? And do they have any direct impact on us here in Contra Costa? And I'm not meaning to diminish the nuances of your question. I'm just trying to translate for everybody here so they can hear. If you believe that the freshwater diversions are already over appropriated, then the bigger challenge becomes calculating how much we need to put back in the delta to repel the salinity intrusion that's contaminating the rock slough intake on the Contra Costa Canal, to restore the fisheries, et cetera, et cetera. We know that we've been taking too much because the species are in such decline, and we're irrigating lands that should not be irrigating. We're creating other drainage and contamination problems from the desert lands we're irrigating. That point is not ceded by agriculture. They want at least as much as they've gotten and probably more. And so the big political, collision underway is to negotiate what the state supposedly has agreed to already do, which is put more water back in the system to save the fish and the ecosystem. So to me, unless those tunnels were sized such that it limited the amount of water that you could send to a threshold that could not be exceeded for agriculture, essentially we have to decide how much water we're going to use to operate within our carrying capacity. They're already putting lands out into retirement, agricultural lands in the San Joaquin Valley. It's been an interim part of the plan. They recognize we're over-irrigated and we're irrigating the wrong lands. That's already gone back to fish. It's just not enough. I'm talking about 100,000, 200,000 acre feet. Again, in an average rainfall year of 27 million acre feet. So we're trying to bump that number up to get into the millions of acre feet back into the estuary system. And it can only come from one place. It can only come from agriculture. We have proposed a portfolio decision, portfolio approach, an approach of conservation. There's still flood irrigating going on in the valley. It should not be. That's just a massive waste of water. And the portfolio recommendation that we've developed, and it's on our website, though I haven't even made my way through all of it, starts with conservation, because we can make massive gains in conservation by reducing our water use, altering our crop pattern, planting patterns, and many other strategies. So we think we can get to where we need to be without a massive engineering solution. It's my opinion.
Thank you very much, Mark.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
There we go. Thanks for all that you do, and I'm going to check out the website. Before you get up, I have 3 things to tell you about. Our next Live from the Library program is April 2nd here with, it's called The Real Housewives, or Behind the Scenes of the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills. It's a new show that's going to be at the Lesher Center, or Walnut Creek, sorry. It just rolls off the tongue. The writer and director is Molly Bell, who's a well-known figure in Walnut Creek, and she has a really fun show coming. She's going to come here for Live from the Library, same bat place, same bat time, to talk about her show. That's going to open, I think, at the end of April or May?
Early in May.
Early in May.
Yeah, about mid-May.
If you like putting on...
Mid-April.
Mid-April.
Yeah.
If we have our fundraiser coming up, Authors Under the Stars is here at the library. You get to dine all throughout the library, and we're taking over the whole thing to raise money for programs, for the summer reading program for children and for the collections. And if you're interested, there's information on the table outside, and there's invitations as well. And you can also go to our fabulous website, wclibrary.org, to get more information about the authors that are going to be there that you can eat with. And finally, on February 25th, our city manager is going to be in the room talking about the city's budget. The city of Walnut Creek has a problem, and we want as many people as we can to learn about it. If the city does not do anything, library hours will be cut. It will be, the libraries, both of them, will only be open 35 hours rather than 56, and there are other things that may happen in the city. So a city council has a lot of work to do and a lot of people they would like to hear from. So there are flyers that you can get on the way out. We hope that you will come on the 25th. We hope that you will sign up for our e-news to get more information about this. And if you do come, ask questions. Raise your hand and ask, just like tonight. Learn more because, what is it? Think locally, and act globally. And we really appreciate that you came tonight to learn about the water and the things that are happening in our wonderful state and our wonderful area, because being informed helps us all just kind of appreciate and do more for the places that we love to live in. So thank you very much and have a good night.